Hello everyone. So today I'm going to be reassembling my newly clean Onan carburetor. This is the Nikki series. I don't know if the camera can see that. For my 6.5 watt Onan Emerald NHE generator. And there's the serial number on the top of the carb there. Maybe the camera can focus on that so you guys can, there we go, see that. So if you know you got a similar carb to this one, if you're having any doubts in rebuilding it, then this video should help you, because I took this apart a week and a half ago and I'm going to attempt to put it back together from memory. So that should be some motivation for you to get out there to get your carburetor cleaned on your Onan. Because if I can do it, I'm sure you guys can. Because I am not at all as confident in my abilities as I should be. But let's see if I can get this nicely cleaned carburetor back together. So the story is, on my generator, it was running roughly, it was skipping, not really skipping, but it was hesitating or hunting for some reasons I couldn't figure out, and the carburetor was definitely dirty. This had about 2 or 3 years of fuel that sat in it. That was old, and probably the generator hadn't run in almost 5 to 10 years, so it was just nasty. But it has now been freshly out of a carb dip that I had put it in, and it is very much better clean, the bowl and everything. Now I'm just going to give it a nice brushing with some carburetor parts cleaner here. I have chlorinated, and after I brush up my parts with this, I'm going to give it a nice degreaser of instant part cleaner here. So I'll be using these two products to give it a good scrub with a nice sanitary toothbrush, and we'll see if we can't get this shining nicely and ready to be put back together again. So I'm just going to shoot a little bit of this down into my carburetor. I'm going to really brush it out. Every now and then I'm going to rub the brush on the table to kind of get some of the dirt off the bristles that I'm removing from the carburetor. Not much dirt left in it after that nice carb dip it went into. I definitely do recommend doing a carb dip if you haven't done it before. You just submerge your carburetor and parts, non-plastic or rubber, into a dip overnight, and in the morning you get a nice clean carburetor that you can scrub. Now this has been scrubbed once after it got out of the carb dip, but I want to make sure there's no harmful chemicals left on the surface, so I'm going to clean it with harmful chemicals. But that's the trick to it. I'm going to use a degreaser at the end to kind of make sure that everything here gets thoroughly cleaned, and that there's no harmful dirt left over on this brand new, practically fully refurbished carburetor. And I will post a few photos at the end of this video of how it looked before and after, because I don't have it on video, of course, before I did this. But this is more of a, you know, you can do it yourself kind of video, because if I can do it, I'm sure you guys can. So now the carburetor is pretty much cleaned, honestly. The fuel bowl, I've already sprayed it a little bit. It cleaned up quite nicely, you can see on camera. My biggest concern when it comes to this is my jets. So this is the main jet for the Onan carburetor for the NHE. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot some carb spray using a precision sprayer, if I can get it off the side of the, there it is. Plug it into my little nozzle here. There we go, got the little thing on there. And now I'm going to stick this into the end of it and blow out as much crap as I can. So we're just going to shoot it out of there. There we go. Now with that carb cleaner in there, I'm going to take my bristle brush. This is a specialty brush for just cleaning jets. I'm going to push it up and ram it up inside of here and scrub out any dirt that may be inside of this jet. This is very important because this jet and the idle jet, which you'll see soon, which is even smaller, is what essentially delivers fuel to your engine precisely. And if it's clogged, it can cause serious hunting issues. Now I'm going to use this really small, like 50ths of a fraction of an inch ramrod here, and I'm going to push it through every individual hole on the jet, all the way through. So I'm going to push it through this hole, and then it goes all the way through. So it kind of gets any crud out of there that could be stuck inside of the holes in this jet. So I'm going to push that all the way through. Just keep, I'll see if I can't get a close-up on the camera of the holes on the side of this jet. So if you can see here, I'm pushing it through the hole, and it goes all the way through, out the hole on the opposite side, and I just give it a nice little run through. And I'm going to do this now for all of the holes on the side of this jet. And if there is any crud inside of this jet after all this time, it's not going to be in there anymore. And after this, we will give it a little bit of compressed air so that we can blow out any of the stuff I loosened up so it doesn't get right back into those holes after this starts getting run again inside the generator. Because that would be no good. Doing all this work and having it go back in would just be redundant. And there we go, last one at the top. And there we go. If you don't have one of these rods, I've heard a toothpick can work, or maybe even a paper clip. Just make sure you don't get anything that in there that would leave metal shavings, because that would be detrimental, because you do not want any metal in your generator going into the air intake. So now I got my little handy air tool here. I'm just going to give it a little bit of squirts. And that just essentially cleaned it up. And of course I could give it a little brushing on the outside just to put a little bit of chlorinated carb cleaner on there and give it a little brushing. Wouldn't hurt to make sure the outside is polished. Alright, looks pretty good. We're going to set that down, and now we're going to move on to its little cousin, the most difficult one to clean, and that is this little guy here, the idle jet. I do not have anything small enough to fit through the holes on this idle jet. They are very small, but I do believe I can fit my thinnest ramrod here up the middle of this, and I can still get some dirt out if there is dirt inside of it. I do want to give it a little spurts of chlorinated carb cleaner, see if I can get any inside of it. Alright, good, good, good. Let's see if I can get the ramrod up in there. It is not easy to get anything into the small hole on the end of this jet. Okay, I don't think we're going to get nothing in there. Let's see, the top opening is quite large on this, so I should be able to get the feathered one in there. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the feathered one is in there. Twist that around a bit so that any crud in there gets loosened up, and pull that out. Do that one more time. Pull that out. And if you can look through it, I know you probably won't be able to see this on camera, but if you can see light as you look through this, there you go, you can see a little bit, it's clean. Same thing with the holes on the side, you probably won't be able to see those though. Oh, if I line it up just perfectly, you can kind of see it for a brief moment. Yeah, there's light coming through the jet holes on each side. That shows that it is unclogged. Has the same thing to go with this jet here. You can hold it sideways up to the light, and you want to look through it and make sure you can see light through all those holes, and that's going to show you that all of them are thoroughly clean. And then down the middle and make sure it looks clean. I will be right back. Okay. So I went and got some gloves, as it's probably better to be using gloves with harsh chemicals like these, especially since it is starting to dry out my skin. So I'm going to choose to keep these gloves on. So now I'm going to brush up the throttle plate here. A bit of carb cleaner on it, on both sides. Give it a nice thorough brushing. Now some of this crud and dirt might never come out of this plate, but as long as you've got the surface dirt off, then it will be 100% better. Okay, so at least it's a little bit cleaner. Put that down there. Let's get the choke plate the same way. A little bit of chlorinated carb spray. Get it nice and brushed up. Get the other side. There we go. Very nice. Now just do a little bit of miscellaneous cleaning, like the idle set screw here. I'm just going to give it a little spurts of carb cleaner and a nice little brushing. So I want to make sure all your individual parts are clean. I did a lot of cleaning off camera, so I don't have to do too much boring scrubbing on camera here. But just wanted to show, especially the jets, how important it is to make sure those are clean and not dirty by any means, because those are the lifeblood of your carburetor, and that's probably the reason you're breaking it down, honestly, to clean it, because those are probably your problem. Of course, it can be a lot of other things, but dirt in your carburetor is not one thing you want in your carburetor. So all my parts are practically clean. I'm just going to go ahead, and since I was using a chlorinated carburetor parts cleaner, I'm going to just kind of spray my stuff down with a non-chlorinated instant parts degreaser for just kind of all makes of parts. It doesn't just have to be carburetors. So just a quick little spurts of stuff through the carburetor. This stuff is very high pressure. Probably just got some on my camera. That's nice. A little bit lower pressure required. Kind of spray my parts down here. Okay. So, it's time to start reassembling things, especially starting with the fuel bowl. That's where all the action happens. So, starting, before I assemble the carburetor base here, you can see there's the main jet hole, and then your smaller idle jet hole. There's the hole here for the fuel, which is where the float connects to. That's where your fuel inlet, you can see the inlet is on the other side. It goes directly to this hole right here. So you have that, and then the mysterious hole that I don't know where that goes. Maybe an expert does, not me. I'm not the expert. So don't take my advice with a grain of salt, is all I'm saying. So let's go ahead and blow this off. We don't want any debris inside of our carburetor when we go to put it together, so we're going to give it a little bit of squirts of some compressed air. Especially through these small holes, you don't want any debris in there. Okay, everything looks pretty much clean there. So let's go ahead and begin the assembly of all the jets. I'm going to start with the easier one, the main jet. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to insert it into this hole right here, and it's going to kind of fall into place. You'll notice as I turn it, it just goes down in there. And it's quite hard to see, but if you look at the jet before I start turning it, it's got kind of a screw head on it. You want to use a very small narrow screwdriver like this one here that can easily fit down this hole without making contact with the threads, but wide enough to make contact firmly with the jet, because you want this to screw in tightly, but you don't want to strip this. If you look close enough, you can already see I kind of stripped it a little bit, but I'm not going to let that happen again. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to push it down in there, and it will catch on the inside. Now I'll take my screwdriver here, I'll begin to tighten it. And my jet is now screwing in. It's starting to get kind of tight now. I can feel it. So I'm going to give it a little bit of a firmer tightness, and that's it. Just a small amount of tension is all you need. Now you can see, if you look down inside the carburetor, there's my jet sticking up. And that's how the Venturi effect occurs, to create suction so the jet can bring up nice gasoline for your generator to drink up as quickly as it possibly can. Alright, that's firm. You don't need to go any tighter than that. Hand tighten is it. Don't try to overstrip it. You can strip aluminum and it will be a mess. So next up, I'm going to put in the small idle. That's this little tiny guy here. It's going to go down into this hole right here. It'll also drop down in there. So you can see there it is, kind of sitting on the surface. I'm going to use my micro driver on this one. So I kind of have a set of smaller screwdrivers here. You want one that's kind of mostly the size of the entire top of this. That'll fit down in there firmly. So this will kind of just drop down in now. You'll see it'll just go. Well, this one actually doesn't drop very far, but we're going to go ahead and start screwing it down so that it can go down into place. Okay, it's starting to get tight now. I'm going to go ahead and give it a nice little bit further to go actually before that gets tight. Okay, now it's way down in there and it's tight. I'm going to give it a little bit of a firm kind of push, and that's it. You don't need to go much further. These are not going to back themselves out. There's very little likelihood that that's just going to pop out one day. It's going to stay right there. There's no really tension on that. Okay, for the idle screw now, there's actually a screw head. This little guy here, it's a very fat screw. It's got kind of a interesting look to it. It goes over the top to cover up the idle hole. So that's going to fit on top just like that, as you can see it there. I'm going to start it with my larger of my flatheads. And that just snugs up right like that, and you can see the screw head there now as it sits on top. Okay, so far I think I'm doing pretty good for doing this by memory from when I took it apart a week and a half ago. Like I said, you can't trust me all the way, but I'm doing my best. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and attach the float body. So that is this guy right here. This is my float. The float comes in separate pieces. The pieces you need to worry about are this one, and this one. And don't worry, I'm going to show the camera up close in just a moment. Just got to get my hands coordinated. I'm going to move the carburetor a little bit back for right now. You can take a break. Okay, so we got the float, the actual float itself here. You've got the needle here that sticks through the float. This is kind of like the shaft it rotates on. You've got the actual thing here that the float, it hangs on the float freely, and it has this little hook here you can kind of see. The camera will show it. And that is essentially where it will close the fuel valve to stop fuel from coming in when the float closes. And last but not least, the screw itself that holds the float together. So, the way the float is assembled is we're going to take this rod here, and it pushes through just like that and sits freely inside of the float body. Next, we're going to take this little needle here, and it takes a little bit of maneuvering, so I'm going to take the float rod out so that it doesn't get in my way. So you can see that I kind of have to push this up and kind of force the needle to kind of travel up and over so that underneath here it hangs just like that. So it just hangs freely. You can kind of see on the top there, I know it's hard to focus, the needle just kind of stays put there as long as you set it right. So I'm going to set this right here for now, and be careful as it is easy for that little needle to fall out. I'm going to grab the carburetor body here, and I'm going to lift up this as a whole and levelly kind of set it down into place on the top of the carburetor body. I know now you can kind of see that the needle is, that you can see how the armature rests perfectly right there. There is a screw slot right there to hold down the shaft here to stop it from coming out. So what we're going to do is, since this is a part that is under tension, I'm going to take a little tiny bit of thread locker blue. I do not need much. I cannot stress this more than enough. You just need a little baby-sized droplet on the edge of that screw. So, just like that. You don't need much. And then we're going to set that screw into the top there. We're going to need to do a little bit of maneuvering. This is a Phillips head screw, but I do not have a Phillips head on hand right now, so this is not recommended, but this is what I'm going to do. Is just get it kind of hand tightened. You're going to want to kind of put your thumb on top of the shaft here to keep it from moving while you tighten the screw down. I'm just going to hand tighten it right now, and I will come back with a proper Phillips head to torque that down a little bit, but not too much. And you can already see how the float works now, where it can go up and down, and you can see that the needle, as it is very difficult to see, has seated itself down into its little shaft where it opens and closes to allow fuel to come in and come out. So we're going to be right back with that Phillips head to tighten down that Phillips head screw. Back to what I was saying, we've now torqued down the screw here. The float has the needle set properly down in there. And we are ready now to go ahead and put on the gasket that goes around this. Now the gasket, albeit it is circular, also shout out to Onan parts for getting the gaskets. Very appreciative for those. And you can see the gasket is a rectangle, but of course it's in a circular shape, so you want to set it in here so that it's not at an angle or creased, so that this sets flushly inside of the thing here. So you don't want it to kind of bend like that. You want it to be flat. So it takes a little bit of work to try and get it to set like that inside of that crevice. So you're going to have to kind of work your way around with your finger and precisely kind of push down evenly with pressure. Kind of follow out, almost like I can explain this kind of like a Ziploc bag. You don't close the Ziploc in random spots. You kind of get it started and then you kind of push it all the way around until you seal the Ziploc all the way. And that's what we're doing today. We are sealing my Ziploc bag of a carburetor. And once you get it firmly pushed in there, and it is, you can tell it's nice and flat inside of the curvature it's supposed to be in. There you can kind of see it up close. It is very flush looking. We're going to go ahead and get our freshly cleaned carb bowl and set it right on top of that. Now, it's not like the carb bowl itself is directional. However, it does have this indentation for this little piece here that lets you adjust the, they call it the altitude adjustment, but this is really the idle and main jet adjuster. You kind of want that to be facing you a little bit, so you're going to kind of like align this piece here with your fuel valve so that you can kind of see here the fuel valve here. There's an arrow here to kind of show. There's no arrow on the actual carb bowl, but we're going to line the center of this piece here up with the center of that arrow on the carburetor. And you'll notice the jet, or the, not the jet, the bowl doesn't really line up all that easy, but we'll do a little bit of the lining process will kind of come from this big old thing that fits in here, which is this guy right here. This screws into this to seal this up. Now, there's a gasket for this, So you want to watch out. You're going to put on this little red gasket here. That's going to help seal this part of the carb bowl so fuel doesn't leak out of it. You don't want any fuel leaks. And after that, this here is the main adjuster screw, and this does have a gasket for it. That's this little itty bitty, and it's really hard to see. I'm going to kind of put it on the actual thing here so you can kind of see it. It's like a little donut shaped gasket. You're going to want to get that all the way down to where you see that kind of a space there for it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, a little bit off camera, because it's difficult to maneuver this gasket because of how small and how tight it is. And you're going to want to get this gasket pushed down into that gap, because you're going to need this soon after you push in that other piece that goes in on top of the carburetor bowl. Apparently, if you have gloves on, you can never accomplish such a goal. I'm going to use a small screwdriver lightly to assist me in getting it over that lip. You don't want to tear this gasket though. You just want to get it started, and then you kind of do the Ziploc bag where you kind of just, it's there and you kind of push and it will pop right into place. And there it is. And that will help seal your main jet and idle jet when that goes in. Because this inserts into this. Just like that. Okay, so now we're going to take this and screw it into the top of our carb bowl. Just like so. I'm going to try to keep this aligned and centered while I do this. So I'm going to hand tighten this while keeping it centered as far as I can. It's going to get kind of firm. There we go. You can kind of feel that's firm. And if you don't have a wrench on you, you can get a pair of pliers that are big. And you can kind of get a good grip around the sides of it, nice and firm, so you don't score the surface or strip this. You kind of want to get it so it's nice, not too tight, but you want to get it firm, and then about a quarter turn, just like the standard mechanics rule, to get that gasket to seat nice and firmly on that aluminum carb bowl. All right. So unless I've forgotten something, which it doesn't look like I have, that means my bowl is practically assembled. That's one hard step down. I'm going to take the mixture screw, and I'm just going to, also this has a spring on it, I forgot to mention. It is one of the biggest springs of the set of 3 springs that are on this carburetor. So the biggest and fattest spring goes on top of this, and then you're going to insert it just like this, and it's kind of like a thumb screw, so you can take your fingers and kind of catch the threads and bring this in all the way. And since I'm not putting it on the generator yet, I'm going to seat this all the way down as if the mixture is completely leaned out, and these adjustments will be made on the generator, not at the bench. And then this little piece here kind of just fits itself over the top of this, and that's what fits in that little channel there to allow you to kind of turn this to set that adjustment like I mentioned earlier. It limits your adjusting range. That's why it was important to leave this here, so that the sticker that goes on the front of this can be visible and you can see your altitude adjustments, because this is the fuel inlet and this is what you're going to be viewing when you see the generator, this front part of it, which will be easily accessed. Now comes a bit more of a difficult part. I need to take the butterfly flaps and reinstall them. So first I am going to go with the choke plate. So the choke plate is this one here with this piece here, and it's got a threaded end on it. It's the only one that goes all the way through. So you can see here, this is the plate that goes all the way through. I lied to you when I talked about the plates. The bigger one is actually the choke plate. I just now have figured this out. So I'm going to insert this as you're holding the carburetor with the fuel inlet on the left hand side from the right to the left. I'm going to stop it there where you can see the 2 screw holes on the plate there and the indention in the middle. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to use the fact that I can kind of see on this plate, if you notice between the 2 screws, kind of the outline of that plate, but you don't see it on the other side, do you? It's kind of clean on the other side. But this side here, you can see where that plate used to rest. So I know that this inserts this way into the carburetor. So I'm going to use gravity to my advantage. I'm going to turn this straight up and down to help me align this. I'm going to insert the plate carefully so that it rests on those screw holes. So just like that, where it's resting right there on those screw holes gently. It's hard to show the camera this and maintain a good handle on the actual unit itself. So now I'm going to set this right here where it will rest for the moment in time being. I'm actually just going to pull the plate out. I want to prep my screws, so I'm going to be using these very, very tiny screws here. And I'm going to put a dab, a microscopic dab of this thread locker blue, because you don't want these screws to come loose. These are your screws for your, butterfly flaps, and if they come loose, that could mean chaos for your carburetor, your set, or anything else in relation to it. So you don't want those to be messed up. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-dab those with just a little bit of thread locker blue. If I can get some to come out. I just dumped a whole bunch onto my table, but that's okay. I'll just dip them in it. Just a little bit on the end is all you really need. It's nothing extreme. And this will all dry, of course, before everything goes back together. So now I'm going to go ahead and get my plate. I'm going to put my finger here on the edge to kind of hold this in place for me. I'm going to insert this the proper way. I'm going to try to not score the inside of my carburetor up a whole bunch. Let's see if we can get these screws started to thread. If you have a small screwdriver with a magnetic tip, you're lucky. I don't. I do have a small Phillips head though that I will be using to position these screws. It'll take me a little bit of time here, so sorry for the bad camera angles, but I do need to get these screws seated, and it does take a little bit of precision. I am very pleasantly surprised though, actually I have a magnetic tip screwdriver. I didn't know that. You learn something new every day. So I am one of the lucky few who have a magnetic tip screwdriver. And of course I'd recommend that you have one. So now I got both screws in. You can see that I'm now tightening them down. I'm going to get them to the point where they get snug a little bit. And I'm going to back them off. Just a little bit. Kind of get them a little snug. And I'm going to back them off a little bit. Because I want to be able to make sure that this has a lot of free play here inside of the carburetor. You don't want this to be anywhere near being locked up. So I'm going to close this and make sure it seats nicely, and as I hold my finger and hold this shut, I'm going to take my larger screwdriver here and I'm going to go ahead and torque these down all the way to make the necessary adjustments. So go ahead and make the necessary adjustments there, necessary adjustments there. I'm going to go back and make sure that my choke plate opens nice and smooth, and that's perfect. And that's exactly how you want it. Next, I'm going to turn this around and we're going to tackle the throttle plate next. So here we have the throttle plate armature. This inserts one way, and as you can see from the blunt end, it does not come out the other end. So there's only one way to really insert this. You can't really screw it up. It's harder to see because this one's really further in, and this one's going to be a lot more difficult to get on camera, but it's the same deal. If I open up the choke plate, you can get some more light. There we go. It's got the two holes. You want to line them up, and you want to get your plate on there with a little bit of that thread locker, or if you have anything else, so that you can make sure those screws never come out. You're going to want to get those in there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. It's too difficult for me to show on camera, so I apologize. This plate has to go way back in there, and of course you can look at the plate and see kind of the markings where you can see the lines from the original thing. I don't know if it's easy to see on camera, but you can kind of tell that this was making contact with that plate and this side wasn't. So because of that, you can insert it properly the first time. Also, someone told me that there is actually a slight kind of bevel to the edge of this. It's not perfectly flat, so if you kind of hold it up, you can kind of see how it's supposed to seat properly on top of the carb every time. So let's go ahead and get this in. I'm going to get a small bit of thread locker glue once again on my screws. You don't need much. Just enough to allow it to seal. I'm going to kind of just have to drop this in, which is unfortunate, but you don't get much room here to work when it comes to lining this up. Okay, I gotta actually back that out because it is not wanting to cooperate. Let's try that again. This may take you a couple retries, as it is already taking me a few. Okay. Progress. Okay, there we go. I've gotten mine kind of seated where I can see the screw holes through the actual holes on the throttle plate. I have a strange feeling that this is upside down and it could be not omnidirectional, so I'm actually going to turn this around and try it to see if it feels smoother. If you hold your finger on there and if it feels like it's binding and you can't control it, then it could be possibly because of the fact that it is not the right orientation. Now, I might be crazy, but it kind of feels like mine was binding when it was in that other position. So I'm going to go ahead and get these lined up. I put my screws in with my magnetic screwdriver and get them started. And it's going to be the same process of the choke plate, just repeated when it comes to the orientation and the actual orientation of the plate. You don't want any what's the right word? Catching. You want it to be completely free play. You don't want it to catch. You don't want it to feel like it's binding on you. That's the best word to use, binding. That's why I tighten them down and I go backwards a little bit just so it has room to jiggle a bit. And then you want to see that, oh yeah, it moves smoothly and perfectly. Then you want to kind of close it where it's nice and snug with the edges, and that's where you want to go ahead and take a screwdriver that is suitable enough and go ahead and torque it down so that the plate screws are firm with the plate adjustment. Don't overdo it, just do it just enough so that it feels smooth, and then of course go back and check if it feels smooth, and it should feel nice and smooth with the movement and fluidity of it. And you can go ahead and check both. When you hold your carburetor like this, you can go ahead and move this one back and forth. There should be no binding, and move this one back and forth, and there should be no binding. So now we are on our way to almost finishing up this carburetor, and that is great. So I'm going to go ahead and take this idle screw here. This has to go back in. It is one of these smaller springs. So this spring here that fits around this, it's the smallest of the all springs. That's going to go right up top here. You can kind of see the port for it. It's right behind the choke, or I'm sorry, the throttle. So we're going to go ahead and screw that in. Go ahead and use a screwdriver and run this down. Some screwdrivers are too thick for the job. This little one here can just do the job because there's not that much tension on this screw, although it does slip off, which can be a little bit annoying. Now, of course, this is an adjustable piece that you need to adjust to make sure that your mixture is correct on your generator so that it runs good. I'm not going to adjust it now to the factory settings. I'm just going to dial it all the way in until it's firm. I'm going to take the plastic adjuster, because there's one for this one just like the bottom. This one right here that allows free adjustment by finger a little bit. I'm going to put it, you just kind of push a little bit and it will kind of just sit right on top. And that's how you were to adjust it if you want to make micro adjustments on your gen set while it's running. Same thing with the bottom here with how this is set up. Similar idea. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and put the little choke flag on here. All this really is just kind of a, on my set it doesn't really do anything, but it just kind of, I guess, shows the position of the choke. This doesn't hook up to anything on my set. Now on other people's sets this might be a useful piece, but it is directional, so make sure you put it on with the choke part kind of aligning with the backside part here. So they're like that. There is a little tiny lock washer here, so we're going to go ahead and set that on top. So you can see there's the little lock washer, and then there is a small nut that screws onto that. Here it is. I thought I lost it for a second. So I'm going to kind of get it started with my finger here, and then I'll show you guys on camera. It is a little difficult to get started. There we go, and you can kind of see the small washer there. I'm going to go ahead and hand tighten this to a certain point, and then of course I'm going to come back over with my trusty pliers and give that a nice even tightening so that it stays nice and tight. And you may have to adjust your pliers so that you can actually get a grip on it, because this nut is rather small compared to the nuts on the side and the bottom that you've already probably worked with. Kind of just nice and easy. You want to get that nice lock washer to the seat all the way so that it can fully get a hold of that. Perfect. So here we go. Now that's on all the way. There's not much left at this point. There is a throttle stop screw here. This screw right here goes on the top part here. There is a spring for it. It is the last spring there is. It's the medium size one. And that screws into the top part here. Just like so, right above the throttle. So you're going to want to go ahead and screw this down a little bit. This one's also going to be one of those adjustable ones when you get it onto the gen set. So there's not much you can do with it right now. I'm just going to screw it down a little bit so it has enough firmness so it won't back itself out. But you'll have to kind of set this per your set, and it depends on how the load works. Okay, so that's practically it when it comes to basics for the carburetor. There is a little bit more stuff, like mine has a fuel inlet here. So these pieces here that are brass screw onto this part right here, and this part here kind of attaches to there, and then these two go together. These are probably not going to be the similar for your carburetor, because this is a custom job that someone did to my gen set who knows how long ago, that made it so that it can be a hose barb for the fuel inlet. But I'm not going to do this right now because I use a special thread sealer on this for gasoline products, so that it will seal and no fuel leakages will occur, and I will do that later off camera. But as for basics wise, and then of course you got your linkages. This is one of the linkages from the generator that hook up right here, and then if you have an electric choke, this piece here will hook onto the side of the choke and operate it along with the vacuum choke. So that's about all I can give you guys today. I hope that this does help. But this shows that this carburetor is not that hard to take apart and put back together. And now that it's nice and clean, I can go take it and put it on my generator and get great success, hopefully, with making my generator run smooth. Now that my carburetor is all nice and clean. You can see down the inside of that there, and it just looks so shiny you could probably eat off of it. So I hope this helps for anybody out there who has a similar carburetor to this one, or an Onan gen set that just is not running right, and you're thinking that maybe you want to buy a new carburetor. Well, they're too expensive. I hate to break it to you. These things are like $300 and some, and that's a lot of money. And if you have the original, it's probably worth it to just go ahead and clean it. You don't need to buy a rebuild kit. You can do just as good with just new gaskets and just go ahead and clean it up a good bit. Now that is, of course, if you have a broken jet, you might want to get a rebuild kit, but the rebuild kit only gives you just more jets and other things that are probably fine on your carburetor. With normal wear and tear use, they don't usually just go bad. That's only if you damaged it mechanically when taking it apart or other things like that, but they're pretty easy unless they lock up or corrode. So if you ever need to take yours apart, you can always watch this video in reverse, because that's essentially how it goes when it comes to taking one of these guys apart. Now you don't have to take the butterfly flaps off to clean a carburetor like this. I ended up taking mine off because I was trying to do something else with it beforehand, and they were just off, so I went ahead and did it. But this video at least is now completely inclusive to all the moving pieces on this carburetor, down to literally just the body of the carburetor built back up to its full operational self. So that's it for today's video. I hope everybody enjoyed. I hope this will help you get your Onan carburetor cleaned up and in good shape for this coming fall season for all you RVers out there who have an Onan set on their RV. And this works for, I'm sure, the Emerald series. I don't know about the Marquee series. I think they use a similar carburetor, but of course there's always variants. But like I said, this is the Nikki variant carburetor, and those are the numbers on top. So if you want to compare your carburetor to mine, that is the one I have. Alright, well, thank you very much for staying tuned through my fun process here, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Goodbye.